This week, a U.S. Senator, a sitting U.S. Senator, said one of the dumbest and most dangerous and stupidest things I've ever heard a politician say. We'll take a look at what that is in just a minute. Thanks for joining us on the Case for Life program. We're delighted to have you. Let me remind you again, if you have not gone to our websites and liked them, please do. Also, if you would take a look at our course, our Pro-Life 101 course, which in 1 week will equip you to defend your pro-life views in a very confused world. You can find a link to that on our sites, and I hope you'll take a look at that. Well, this has been an interesting week for a lot of reasons. There's been a brutal murder in Charlotte that is just heart-wrenching to think about. But there was something else that happened this week that I think we need to draw our attention to, because if we're not careful, it's ideas like that expressed by Democrat Tim Kaine in the Senate that threaten to undermine our republic's foundation. I'll give you the background, then we'll actually go look at the clip. There was a hearing in the U.S. Senate for a seat on the U.S. Foreign Relations Committee, and one of the nominees for that position had just quoted Senator Marco Rubio, quoting the Declaration of Independence, that our fundamental or natural rights come from God, not the government. And we're going to see where Democrat Tim Kaine takes unbelievable offense at that and thinks it's a dangerous idea to ground human rights, our basic human rights, in the idea of natural rights that are grounded in the concept of a creator. To just give you a little more background on this, you've heard us talk about natural rights on this program before. Natural rights are those rights you have in virtue of being human. Government does not grant these rights. Government's job, according to our founders, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and the other founders of our nation, natural rights are those rights you have that are pre-political, meaning government doesn't invent them. Government's job is to recognize and protect them for the sake of the human individual. That's the idea of natural rights. Now, where do we ground these natural rights? Well, our founders, as we see in the Declaration of Independence, grounded our natural rights in a transcendent source, God. And they weren't unclear about that. They were very clear that we are endowed by our Creator with certain fundamental rights that are not the product of legislation or court cases, what we call positive law. So in the American system, there are really two sources for law and rights. The first is what we call endowed rights or natural rights that flow to us as humans simply because we're human beings. I've used this example before, but it'll help explain it again. If I travel to a foreign nation, let's just say the United Kingdom, I do not have a legal right to vote in that nation's next election. Though I might want to, I can't. Why? For the very simple reason I'm not a British citizen. And the government of the United Kingdom has determined that only British citizens vote in a British election. Entirely fair. But I do have a natural right not to be gunned down in the middle of Trafalgar Square when I visit London. That natural right is not a right I get because it's granted to me by the American or the British government. Rather, it's a natural right I have in virtue of my humanity. It doesn't matter your nationality. You can be from Bangladesh, you could be from Vietnam, you could be from Canada, from the US, Mexico, does not matter. Even though you're not having a right to vote in that nation, if you're a foreign tourist, you certainly have a natural right not to be unjustly killed in the middle of the city. That's what we mean by natural rights. And when pro-lifers speak about a right to life, we are referencing the natural rights of the unborn. Those rights they have in virtue of being human, not to be unjustly killed. Well, Senator Kaine is going to make a rather outlandish claim about natural rights. I'll let you see it for yourself. Let's go to the clip.
Chair, Mr. Barnes, I was struck by your opening comments, and I asked to get a copy of them so I could read them and make sure I quoted them correctly. You state, and this is a quote from Secretary Rubio, "Our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments." I find that very, very troubling. I'm a devout person. I was a missionary in Honduras. We've got other devout folks in this room, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, American. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the Creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities. And they do it because they believe that they understand what natural rights are from their Creator.
All right, let's stop right there. The senator is doing two things. First, he's trying to poison the well by saying the only people that appeal to natural rights being grounded in a transcendent Creator are those who are vicious terrorists like the Iranian mullahs, for example. All right, look, this is a nice trick, but it's a ploy. It is not grounded in any sense of rational reason at all. The senator here is simply trying to make it look like only a religious fundamentalist who wants to trample on the rights of others would appeal to a transcendent source for natural rights. But there's something else going on here as well. Notice what the senator said. He said that there are all kinds of other religions out there. There's Buddhists, there's Islamic religious people, there's Christian religious people, there's Jewish religious people. And as you'll see in a moment, he's going to make the argument that if you put them all in a room, they would probably disagree on what natural rights are. Well, this makes no sense at all. The fact that people disagree does not mean there are no right answers. This is a very typical play that we see in the playbook of relativists who try to make it look like the absence of agreement means nobody is right. That is not a good argument at all. But I found something else interesting here. The senator is not consistent with his own view. The senator said that he was deeply troubled by the notion that our basic rights come from God, what we call natural rights, rather than a body of law, meaning the courts or, for example, a state or federal legislature. Well, let's think about this for a moment. If the highest source of authority for our basic human rights is the government, here's the problem for Senator Kaine. The same government that grants rights can do what? Obviously, take them away. So here's my question for Senator Kaine. Why did you complain when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 2022? The senator was all over the media, along with every other Democrat, screaming that women's fundamental right to an abortion had just been infringed upon by the court saying there was no explicit right to an abortion in the Constitution. Well, if the senator was being consistent with his own principles, the idea that our rights come from government or the courts rather than a transcendent God, he should have been happy that the court reversed Roe and Casey. After all, the courts and the state houses and the Congress are the highest authority there is. He should have been glad that they acted the way they did. He might not have liked it in the sense that it hurts his precious right to an abortion, but he shouldn't be complaining. At a minimum, he should not be complaining that the court act wrongly. But of course, he does believe the court act wrongly. But on what basis? The same court that granted a right to an abortion with Roe v. Wade in 1973 can take it away in 2022. That's what follows from the idea that there's no higher authority for grounding our rights than statutory law. All right, but there's more problems here. Let me point out another inconsistency. Senator Kaine has been one of those complaining that ICE raids into neighborhoods where there are illegal aliens, these are illegal migrants who invaded the U.S. illegally, came here without going through the proper channels. And as you know, we've seen a lot of footage of ICE agents rounding up these illegal aliens and putting them on planes and deporting them to the countries of their origins. All right, whatever you think about that, that's your business. I'm in favor of it because I think our laws need to have force behind them. We either believe them or we don't. But let's look at another inconsistency on the senator's point here. The senator thinks that the fundamental rights of these migrants are being violated by Trump presidency policies that say we're going to deport people who are not here legally. All right, well, wait a minute. He then says when we deport them, we're violating their fundamental rights. But wait a minute, Senator. If government is the highest source of rights, why are you complaining that these migrants are being wronged by having their fundamental rights violated? Where do those fundamental rights come from? If they come only from the same government that opened the border can now shut it. And the same government that once welcomed wholesale people to invade our country illegally can now deport them. Who are you to judge, and who are you to be upset about this? So there's a lot of inconsistency going on here that is really problematic. But I think there's something else here I want to add as well. Notice how he tried to compare the God of Christianity with the God of Islam, as if the two religious systems are the same. Again, this is a very common tactic on the left. You see it in the bumper sticker that says coexist. You've seen it, haven't you? The bumper sticker that has all the little symbols of the world's major religions on it, and it says coexist. Now, we don't need a coexist bumper sticker in the States. Here's why. You don't get killed for believing the wrong thing. Hopefully, nobody's ever going to show up at your door and say, agree with me on religion or I shoot you in the head. Only a fanatic would do that. The senator's right, I suppose, about that. But here's the thing. In America, we tolerate differences of religion, and indeed there are differences in the religious traditions that the senator mentioned. On a Christian worldview, all humans have value because they bear the image of God. They bear that image whether they're Islamic, Christian, whether they are Jewish, secular, atheist, whether they are politically of the left or politically of the right. It does not matter. Your value as a human being is not based on your development, your cognitive abilities, your political affiliations, your religious identifications, your gender, body size, or any of that. Rather, you have value simply because you bear the image of your maker. That's what we call an endowed view of humanity. Islam does not hold that view. The God of Islam is not a loving God that can be personally known. He's a very vindictive God, a God who wants to destroy any who oppose him and do so right now, not just at a final judgment, but do so now, and commands his followers to produce a war against those who disagree with Islam. That's the whole concept of jihad. All right, now look, there is no correlation between the Christian worldview that stresses toleration. As a Christian, I don't go kill those who disagree with me, including Senator Kaine. I may not like it. I will argue against him. I will do all I can to defeat his party politically, as I believe biblically grounded Christians should, but I don't want him to be personally harmed. I speak no ill will against him personally. I would want the same laws that protect him to protect me, and therefore I care what happens to him. So I don't want him harmed. On Islam, you can wish harm on those who defy Allah. So for him to compare the two together is just ridiculous, and it's what we see often on the political left, where they take religious views and pretend they're all the same. They mix them together in one stew of equivalency and pretend there's no difference. Well, there is a big difference. The God of the Bible, the Christian God, has in his character love for his creation. And because he loves his creation, his followers should love what he has created. And that includes our fellow human beings, even those we might disagree with. So there's no threat to the concept of human dignity, human toleration by invoking natural rights grounded in a Christian theistic God. The senator is just wrong about that because the Islamic worldview and the Christian worldview are nowhere near the same. They may both be wrong, but to claim they're both equally right and have no distinction is just ignorant beyond anything I can imagine. Now, the other thing here that I think you want to watch is see how the senator very cleverly tried to make it sound like he was the one who really believed in natural rights. He claimed to be very devout. He said, I'm a very devout man. He wants everybody to know he's a man of faith. But look at being devout does not make you right. And secondly, just because you use religious terminology does not mean you've mastered the moral and theological views of the tradition you claim to be part of. Now, I know from previous things I've heard the senator say, he more or less identifies as Catholic, but he does not hold to the worldview of the Catholic Church, which opposes things like abortion, opposes things like treating human beings as instruments. The Catholic Church, in its catechism and in its moral theology, teaches the same that Protestant Christians believe, that human beings have value because they bear the image of God. Their value is not based on their performance. It's based on their being endowed by their Creator with value. That worldview is something utterly foreign to the senator. And what I think was going on here was an attempt to undermine that worldview so he could push his agenda forward about gays, lesbians, transgendered individuals having rights that are plucked right out of thin air, that have no grounding at all. And he wants to get away from any kind of foundation that might say, well, wait a minute, there's a natural order to things that we ought to value. Now, let's go on and see what else he has to say.
So the statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our governments is extremely troubling. I think the motto over the Supreme Court is equal justice under law. The oath that you and I take, pledge to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, not arbitrarily defined natural rights.
Okay, he speaks about not arbitrarily defining rights, but that's exactly what his worldview will result in. If there is no natural order, if there is no natural rights that we get in virtue of our humanity objectively, then the government will determine arbitrarily who has rights and who doesn't. Meaning people like Senator Kaine will decide if you have a right to own property, a right to happiness, a right to pursue your own individual interests, a right to life even. It won't be something you have in virtue of your nature as a human being. It will be something you only have because he and government elites decide you have it. I find that troubling. But there's something else. The senator's argument is in my view, self-refuting. The minute you say we ought to have laws based on X, or you say there ought to be a law about X, a given subject, you have just invoked the language of natural rights and natural liberties and natural law, more specifically, because you use the word ought. You're saying we shouldn't have laws based on religion. We ought to have laws based on the government. Well, wait a minute. Where did that moral obligation come from? In other words, he has to borrow from the natural law tradition to even get his claim off the ground that says we ought to respect the legal order over the so-called natural rights theistic order. If he's going to make those kinds of moral claims, he can only do so by invoking principles from the natural law tradition, the idea that moral truths are real and knowable, and that we can get in line with them and ought to get in line with them. They're not things we make up. They're not things we dictate according to preference or political philosophy. Rather, they are truths that are transcendent that come outside of us, and our job is to align with them. Well, he can't make those kinds of claims without invoking a natural law tradition. Let's see what else he has to say.
I'm a strong believer in natural rights, but I have a feeling if we were to have a debate about natural rights in the room and put people around the table with different religious traditions, there would be some significant differences in the definitions of those natural rights.
Okay, I mentioned this earlier. Here we go. He's going to invoke this idea that people disagree, therefore nobody can be right. Now, again, his own claim here is self-refuting. Because I disagree with Senator Kaine. Does that mean his argument now is refuted and we can just dismiss it because people disagree with it? In fact, I'm not the only one who would disagree with it. I know for a fact that a majority of senators would disagree with it. We already have seen Ted Cruz and other senators speak out against what Senator Kaine said here. So obviously, even in his own legislative body, the U.S. Senate, there are people who disagree with him. So if disagreement means nobody's right, the senator isn't right, and we can dismiss his view as being a mere conjecture of his own opinion. Let's see if he has anything else to add here.
You go on to say, I believe our country and our government is the best in the world, and our strength comes from our enduring values. I believe that. But then you say, and you got to choose what to say in your opening testimony, these values aren't an endless list of, quote, rights. You put the quote around that to kind of demean the notion of rights that people create and change and form to meet their own needs or desires. These values aren't identity politics. They're the historic natural rights that we have as individuals pursuing life, liberty, and happiness in the world.
Actually, what the nominee was saying here is spot on. The nominee was saying, look, by natural rights, we do not mean things that people pluck out of thin air. For example, the Right to Die movement says over and over again that people have a right to dignity, by which they mean a right to die. And by that right to die, they mean that doctors have to help them commit suicide. Medical personnel need to be available to help them commit suicide if they want to. And by right, what they really mean is, I have a desire to die, therefore I have a right to die. Or I desire to be a woman, even though my body says I'm a man, therefore you will recognize my right to be a woman. And the nominee was correct to say by rights, by natural rights, we mean fundamental things that our founders spoke of, not just any whim that somebody plucks out of thin air. If you think about the political left for the last 4 decades, they have been about the business of plucking rights out of thin air. You have a right to an abortion, even though it's nowhere found in the Constitution. You have a right to die. You can commit suicide or seek aid in dying if you need it from medical staff. You have a right to be whatever gender you identify as, and we will prosecute people who misgender you. You have a right to decide for yourself what moral systems you will follow. These are things people are just plucking out of thin air. They don't have any grounding. When our founders spoke of foundational rights or endowed rights, notice how careful they were to, first of all, limit these rights to certain things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all of which the left disregards and disavows today. They were very careful to ground where those rights come from. They come from a transcendent creator. And what I think is happening here with Senator Kaine is not him just being flippantly divisive, though I think you could be forgiven if you think that. I think he is trying to put a premise out there in the culture that natural rights are dangerous so that this country adopts the different model that he espouses, that rights are whatever you feel they are, which means there are no rights that are safe for anybody, because the same government that feels I am a human being with rights could later feel I'm not a human being with rights. That's a very dangerous place for us to be. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to talk about how the natural rights debate specifically plays out in 2 rival views of human value, and why, as pro-life Christians, we need to be attuned to that. Hello, friends. You may not have time to read a full-length treatment of abortion like I've done in this book, The Case for Life, the second edition, but you may have time to take what amounts to 7 sessions, a week's worth of study if you want to do it day by day, to learn how to defend your pro-life views persuasively. We have a basic course that will help you do just that. You will learn how to make a formal case for the pro-life position. You will learn how to defend it with science and philosophy. Even with non-Christians, you can make a case for the pro-life view. Then we'll teach you how to handle objections, how to recognize the 5 bad ways people argue about abortion, and how they often bring up things that are beside the point. You'll learn to keep the main thing, so that you're in charge instead of feeling like you're in the hot seat whenever the issue of abortion comes up. Visit the website for details. Welcome back, everyone. If you want to learn more about natural rights, I say a lot about it in my book, The Case for Life, which you can pick up at Amazon or wherever you wish. I said it before the break, we needed to talk about abortion and how it relates to natural rights. There are 2 rival views of the human person in our culture today. The first view is the view of our founders and the view of theologically conservative pro-lifers. We call it the endowment view. And that view says your rights are not based on your capabilities, your immediately exercisable functions like self-awareness or having self-consciousness. Rather, your rights are grounded in your human nature. And when did you get that human nature? The moment you began to exist. The competing view, which Senator Kaine holds to, we know this from his views on abortion, is a performance view of human value that says you're not valuable simply because you're human. In fact, being human means nothing. It's nothing special at all. What matters is having cognitive function like self-awareness, like the ability to feel pain, like having viability, the ability to live independent of another human being. And until you can immediately exercise those functions, you have no value that we have to respect. You have no right to life, so to speak. These 2 worldviews are warring against each other now in the Western world, and pro-life Christians better be equipped to defend an endowment view of human value, an endowment view that says our value comes from our human nature, which is made in the image of God, not some functions that we perform. It's vital you are skilled at defending that endowment worldview. Again, I want to remind you that our short course, Pro-Life 101, can help you do that in just a week's time. I hope you'll take advantage of that. Till next time, let's ground human value and human dignity in a transcendent God.